In Paris, rising by 0.87%. Meanwhile, in New York, trading has been cut short post-Thanksgiving, with shoppers flocking to the shops for an annual retail rush known as Black Friday. Well, for more on all that, let's cross over now to Wall Street, where our financial correspondent Hoda Osman is standing by. Hoda, hello. How did it go today?
Well, the markets here ending today's session significantly higher, and in spite of the shortened session that you mentioned, the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended up by 172 points. That is 1.3%. The Nasdaq is higher by 1.4%, the S&P by 1.3%. And they're reacting actually to global economic reports. So in Germany, we had one index showing that the business climate index was up in November when economists were expecting a decline. And in China, we had one index, the HSBC index, showing growth in the manufacturing sector. And for the first time in over a year, and all of this is affecting the markets here positively. You're also seeing strength in the technology sector with Research in Motion. This is the company that makes the BlackBerry. The stock is up by over 14% after an upgrade by an analyst, also affecting all of the technology sector. So we have HP up by 4% and Microsoft by over 2%.
OK, Hoda Osman reporting there from the New York Stock Exchange. Thank you very much for that. Well, let's move now to other world news. And speaking this Friday outside his presidential palace in Cairo, Egyptian leader Mohamed Morsi defended his decision to assume sweeping new powers, presenting himself as the guarantor of the revolution, of stability and of a country on the path to freedom and democracy. This as his opponents and supporters were facing off in rival rallies across the country.
Mohamed Morsi addressed his supporters who gathered in front of the presidential palace.
The opposition doesn't worry me in the least. On the contrary, I want there to be an opposition. A real opposition, strong and aware. And to my brothers in the opposition, I want to say I'll protect all of their rights so they can exercise them freely.
On Thursday, Egypt's president published a decree that would prevent the Constitutional Assembly from being dissolved. The opposition has called him a dictator. His supporters, however, defend him.
I understand why people compare him to a dictator. He's going to have unprecedented power for 2 months, but afterwards he will transfer it to an elected parliament.
Meanwhile, in Tahrir Square, anti-Morsi protesters denounced his decree, calling him the new pharaoh.
The president isn't thinking about Egypt's interest when he takes those decisions. His sole objective is to control this country.
Violence erupted in several cities across Egypt. In Alexandria, anti-Morsi supporters set fire to Muslim Brotherhood headquarters. There were injuries on both sides.
Well, meanwhile, the Egyptian-mediated truce between Hamas and the Israeli army was shaken this Friday when Israeli troops at the Gaza border shot dead a Palestinian man and wounded 15 others. Palestinian health officials say a 23-year-old man was hit in the head after he approached the security fence that runs between the two territories, an area that Israel has declared a no-go zone for Palestinians. Well, a Hamas spokesman has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire, which took hold on Wednesday, and has announced plans to complain to Cairo. Here's the reaction, meanwhile, of Hamas's rival movement, Fatah. Let's take a listen to the Palestinian Authority's foreign minister.
This is really a clear violation of the agreement that really was signed, and I hope that Egypt has really to be very clear, very strong, when a violation like this really happens and not to be repeated again.
There are bodies lining the road leading south from Sake. That's the eyewitness account of a Doctors Without Borders chief as residents flee the Congolese city in the face of advancing rebels. Well, after capturing the regional capital Goma earlier this week, their next target is the town of Minova. That's some 24 kilometres to the southwest, where the army is said to be regrouping. While the lightning progress of the so-called M23 rebels has displaced tens of thousands of people and raised warnings of a looming humanitarian crisis in the area.
Sake is a ghost town. A few rebel soldiers patrol the streets, but the shops are closed.
The bombs yesterday injured and killed some of my friends.
A rebel officer who received an arm injury is being evacuated by public transport. The fighting lasted for 4 hours, according to people we spoke to. For now, M23 has retaken control of Sake, and their troops are watching enemy movements from nearby hilltops.
When we arrived, we heard gunshots, and then M23 soldiers came into town, and there were heavy explosions. We were in the hills watching them.
This is the road between Sake and Shasha. There's been heavy fighting along here, as you can see by these empty ammunition boxes. We've seen the bodies of several dead Congolese National Army soldiers, but not of rebels. Civilians told us that the M23 cleared away their bodies after the fighting finished. Caught between the two sides, thousands of civilians are once again on the move. Many have been displaced several times in the last few months alone.
Well, here in France, former President Nicolas Sarkozy is breathing a sigh of relief after a 12-hour hearing by the judge probing allegations that he received illegal campaign funding from L'Oréal heiress Liliane Bettencourt, who happens to be France's richest woman. Well, Sarkozy has not been charged, but was named as a special witness, meaning he could be charged at a later date. Well, let's end now with a bit of light relief and an unusual image. 3 Russian tiger cubs who'd been abandoned by their mother at birth have found a new mum, Swiss shepherd dog Talim. The 2 male cubs, Olymp and Dar, and 1 female named Tally after her adoptive mum, are said to pose no threat to the nursing dog, as she feeds them and showers them with attention. Well, who said big cats and dogs couldn't get along? And on that, we're going to leave this edition. It's time for me to hand you back to François Picard for The World This Week.
Cats and dogs, indeed. Thanks for that, Nadia Sharbi in the newsroom. It's time for The World This Week. 7 days for Paris Space Correspondence, 1 hour with us, Nicholas Norbrook of the Africa Report. Also with us, Craig Capidis of Quartz in the Atlantic Monthly. Also Christian Mallard of French public broadcaster France 3. And Vivian Walt of Time Magazine. Welcome one and all. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation throughout the week on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag TWTW. It's certainly a week that Egypt's new president will remember. Mohamed Morsi, brokered a truce with Gaza, got a tentative deal on a crucial $4.8 billion IMF loan. Oh, and he also voted himself sweeping powers. The secular opposition rallying this Friday, sometimes violently, with Muslim Brotherhood offices attacked in several cities. The likes of former presidential hopefuls Mohammed al-Baradei and Amr Moussa joining the protests, al-Baradei even branding Morsi the new pharaoh on Twitter. Morsi supporters, though, staging their own rally in Cairo to back their man's preemptive move to stop a hostile judiciary from stopping an Islamist-dominated panel from drawing up a new constitution. Morsi, who, by the way, has also sacked the nation's prosecutor general, even took the microphone, as you can see.
The opposition doesn't worry me in the least. On the contrary, I want there to be an opposition. A real opposition, strong and aware. And to my brothers in the opposition, I want to say I'll protect all of their rights so they can exercise them freely.
Vivian Walt, what a week.
Well, exactly. And, when I heard Morsi's comment earlier about the opposition, one has to wonder, be careful what you ask for. You want a strong opposition, you will get it. However, Morsi's obviously made a fairly calculated gamble here. There are 82 million people in Egypt, and you're looking at a square that maybe has 5,000 people in it. And he is talking very much to his base, which is, has deep roots throughout the country. It's been a week in which he has had to negotiate a very tricky ceasefire, presumably through Egyptian intelligence with Israel. And it seems like he needs to basically satisfy very contradictory forces.
Let's give some context here. Christian Mallard, this was the second choice to be Egypt's president. And has he surprised you?
No. He's a real Muslim Brotherhood. He can hold several languages at the same time. And as Vivian said, he can play a tricky truce with, at the same time, Israel, playing with the Americans, Hillary Clinton, at the same time showing his people and his base that he's very close to Hamas, of course, and trying he's the man of the situation. I've been able to exert pressure on Hamas to get this truce. But at the same time, this afternoon, I was so surprised when he started putting God in the game, saying, God is with me. So religion is coming slowly but surely. And I think in the coming future, I wouldn't be surprised.
But isn't that just a figure of speech? The U.S. president always says, God bless America in his speeches.
Yeah, sure. But at the same time, the Muslim Brotherhood are different anyway. But what I am afraid of is that after what we call the Mubarak's dictatorship, what it was called like that, we might get a religious dictatorship sometimes in the future. I wouldn't be surprised. And I think it's worrying the way Morsi plays.
Nicholas Norberg?
Well, I mean, that is certainly the worst case scenario. And Morsi has surprised everyone, I think, by how cleverly he's played things, especially the relationship with the military, for example. No one expected him to sort of quietly slip the military out of the game in the way that he did. People were saying this is going to be Turkey, it's going to be a decade-long power struggle between them. You know, he seems to at least have won the first round, you know, even if the military have guaranteed themselves, you know, certain rights in the constitution. But I think the more interesting thing is seeing what people like Hamdin Sabahi, the oppositionist, is trying to do, trying to broker an opposition platform which is genuine and you know, bring together this very fractured opposition into one coherent bloc. The guy was voted by 51% of the population. You know, this is not that popular a president. And whereas, you know, phase one of the Arab Spring was the youth pushing the guy down, phase two was the Islamist takeover, maybe phase three will be the opposition actually cohering and coalescing into something a little bit more solid. That's obviously an optimistic view, but it's one I choose to believe.
Certainly, Mohamed Morsi seems to have gained some new friends over in Washington. According to the New York Times, Barack Obama, who was on a tour of the Far East, spoke 3 times on Monday to Mohamed Morsi, one of those conversations lasting 25 minutes. That's how the idea came up to send Hillary Clinton to Cairo to seal that ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
This is a critical moment for the region. Egypt's new government is assuming the responsibility and leadership that has long made this country a cornerstone of regional stability and peace.
Craig Kapitas, has the United States rolled with the punches?
Oh, yeah. But the Obama administration actually likes Morsi, and they like him for a real interesting reason. He talks American. Remember, he's an engineer who was educated in the United States, and there's obviously a rapport there. And his ace in the hole here is as long as he keeps talking this way, that money's going to be coming in from Washington, and that's what it's all about in Egypt. It's about the military. If the military's on your side, you're okay. Where does the money come from for the military? It comes from the United States. So I think Morsi, he knows where his bread is buttered, and he talks the lingo.
History showed us that the Democrats made a lot of mistakes with the Arabic world and the Persian world. I would just remind you that Jimmy Carter and French President Giscard d'Estaing in the past dropped their support to the Shah and played Khomeini. Look at the results we have got 33 years after. I hope that Barack Obama is not being gullible or naive enough to rely upon Morsi very blindly. I think we have to be very careful with Morsi's game.
Who else does he have? But who else does he have?
Hold on. Vivian Waltz, would you say Mohamed Morsi is a hardliner of the ilk of Ayatollah Khomeini?
No, I wouldn't. And I think that the critical point here is clearly Morsi does not want to abandon the Camp David Accords. And that's critical to the US, critical to Israel. And so long as he isn't prepared to abandon it, he's a very, very important person for Washington. Without him and with an alternative who would abandon it, there would be really drastic consequences for the US and for Israel.
Precisely.
So let's make business with him, in other words.
Right.
I would think so. And if you walk around Cairo, you will find almost nobody on the street who wants peace with Israel, actually. There's a tremendous hostility against the Camp David Accord, but obviously at the leadership level, they realize that they need it and they have to keep it in place.
But it's also been very interesting the way in which he's made diplomatic overtures to Iran, to China. This is a very different regional player. It's not the US ally that, you know, it used to be in the past. I think the chessboard is changing very, very quickly. I'm not sure if the US is keeping up with it. We've seen a Secretary of State who's been touring around the world trying to put out fires almost everywhere. I'm not totally convinced they're on top of this one.
And what if the Chinese come in and offer money? I mean, that's it. I mean, look what the Chinese have done throughout the rest of Africa, as you know better than anyone, the investments there. What if they come in and they start coming to the Maghreb and North Africa with their tens of billions, not a few billion that they have to strangle out of Congress?
Well, I think that's one real weakness in Egypt, is just the enormous level of poverty. The fact that, you know, social services are in the most utterly decrepit state. And this was one great driving force of the revolution. And, you know, we have yet to see whether this new government is going to do anything about it.
32 million Egyptians living by €2 per month.
That's an incredibly sad statistic.
The dust has yet to settle on Egypt, but as Nicholas Norberg was just saying, with the cards redistributed in the wider region, what we've seen when it came to Israel and Hamas going at it is contrary to 4 years ago. There was no ground invasion this time. Here's how Israel's prime minister summed up an 8-day escalation.
We hit terror, infrastructure, and destroyed things that these groups had developed for years. We achieved the goals of our operation. I know that some citizens expect an even tougher operation. We're ready for that too.
The goals of our operation, Benjamin Netanyahu's comments, taken one step further on the front page of Friday's International Herald Tribune with a photo by Tyler Hicks of Palestinians surveying the damage, and the headline, Gaza conflict seen as Iran precursor. That's an interesting point. In that article, you even have the Israeli ambassador to the United States comparing the fact that this is all about Iran, much in the same way the Cuban Missile Crisis was all about the Soviet Union.
I buy that. I think the Iranian really, through Hamas, their ally, tried to test Israel with their short-range missiles, no Fajr, 75 kilometers range. But now the next step, I think, when we met Netanyahu with France 24 and some other colleagues on the 1st of November in Paris, we saw an Israeli prime minister very determined to act, whoever it was 5 days before the American elections, whoever it was, Romney, Obama, going to be elected. And definitely he told us that we are in the last phase of getting this nuclear bomb in Iran, and that he is ready to act. So probably we'll try to exert pressure on Obama. But the question is, with these short-range missiles, what happens if the Iranian use the long-range missiles, the Shahab-3, which can be fitted with nuclear heads? It's another story.
Vivian Walt, when you see the pronouncements of the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament this week, boasting about Iran's military support for groups like Islamic Jihad. This Friday, by the way, he met with Ahmad Jibril of the FPLP in Damascus, of all places. When you see that, it really does seem that way, that it is all about Iran.
In some ways, yes, but there was another thing that was all about Iran this week, and that was that Iran was in some ways, marginalized. For the first time, you had this kind of rift between Hamas and Iran, and Hamas having its much more powerful allies lined up in Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, and on the other hand, you have, Iran and Syria, both of whom are, have these really bad fragility, fragile leaders at the moment in some ways. So I think the picture is quite mixed, actually, in terms of Iran.
Interesting that you say that. Lebanon's Iran-sponsored Hezbollah movement saying Arab states should have been, quote, resisting, not negotiating. But Hamas itself, once again showing, as Vivian was pointing out, an increasing ambivalence when it comes to Tehran.
Iran had a supportive role in arming and financing. Yes, we had a disagreement with Iran on the Syrian issue, and it's natural that we differ because we have people with different demands.
Again, Nicholas, I come back to what you were saying about the cards being redistributed in the wider Middle East.
I think this is a critical period. If there is any escalation with Iran, we're looking at something very serious. Syria, its borders risk being pulled apart. The Shia, Sunni, Druze, Christian, Alawi communities all have their sponsors in the countries around it. I think there's something. Everyone in the US is worried about the fiscal cliff. I think people should be focused on this. This is a really critical issue. If it's not managed with care, who knows what will happen.
Interesting, Craig Kopitis, that Barack Obama goes on this groundbreaking tour of the Far East, and the Middle East drew him back.
All right. Yeah, well, historically, an Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire is a period of cheating between two periods of fighting. They're going to go back at it. I don't.
Are they going to go back at it? Some people predict that this could lead to the first direct negotiations between Israel and Hamas.
If you go back to the 80s, when I first started covering this, late 70s, looking at this, you see the same narrative throughout. They're going to fight again. You see the people in Gaza who are browbeaten, blown to smithereens. And they're raising their AKs in the sky and saying, we have won this. And then you go across the border into Israel, and there's this bus explosion. The bomb on the bus, which reports indicate was put on by an Israeli woman. This area has, for so many centuries, been so out of control. And we tend to focus naturally on what's happening now, what's going to happen tomorrow. The Iranian portion of this, is this the Cuban Missile Crisis redo and whatever. But I suggest the best place to go is to go on the ground, on the street, and you still see that hatred. That hatred, this faith in hatred, not a belief. They don't like each other.
But again, and I'll put it to Vivian Walt, there are some people who think that after what's happened, there is a chance that Hamas and Israel could talk.
They might do at the leadership level, but I agree with Craig that if you go around Israel, as I have been, last year, and around Cairo, around, much of the Middle East, the level of distrust and, pure hatred is really quite striking. Yeah. And it's very difficult to see how this kind of gut level emotional response is going to be managed.
I'm not sure if we're looking at stasis forever. I think, people sitting in Cairo between the 70s and the 90s would have said this is going to go on like this for another 20 years. But it didn't. Right? Likewise in Libya and Tunisia and Syria. These things have a way of boiling over.
Oh, you're right. Listen, I do agree with you. But here's the deal. This problem has been festering in blood for so long. And you look at this with any type of cogent eye. And I always go back to the template, the one template that I've seen in modern history that's worked. And that was what Desmond Tutu did in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That something like that needs to take place in the Middle East, principally between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And if you look at that, which I think is essential and necessary, we are so far away from anyone even talking in cogent terms about something like that happening. So and you look at the desperation in Gaza and on the West Bank.
I think there
Final word from
I think there is so much hatred from these Hamas people and the young people educated in hatred of Israel. I'm not very optimistic for the future. And always the development of this Arabic revolution, which unfriendly environment, I don't expect at any moment Prime Minister Netanyahu to make any concessions.
That's a wonderful statement. Educated in hatred.
Educated in hatred, and let's hope, as Craig says, that someone will figure out a way to break that cycle. When we come back, the world this week continues. You're watching France 24.